Good morning, ACBSP. Welcome to day 2 of your virtual learning landscape. My name is Sarah Sawyer, and I will be your moderator for today's presentation. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin and before I introduce our esteemed guest speaker of the morning. I provided email contact information for Dr. Dawn in the chat box, and we'll continue to provide that for you in the duration of this session. That way, if you have any inquiry, please feel free to reach out to him and he will definitely respond. During the presentation, please note that you can input any direct questions into the Q&A box or into the chat box. And after Dr. Dawn is done presenting his session, we will have a 10-minute period open to address those Q&As and have some facilitative and engaging conversation. Please note that by default, when you do input a question into the chat, it goes only to panelists. So if you'd like to make sure that it goes to attendees as well, that way everybody can see what you're addressing, that'd be very helpful. Also, remember to complete the Best of Regions survey, which Kingsley has provided in the chat box as well. And we will continue to provide that for any attendees that hop into this session. Lastly, it's my honor and privilege to introduce a force of nature from Gardner-Webb University. I'd like to introduce Dr. Don Caudill, an exceptional gentleman, and please take it away.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning. The title of my presentation is A Personal Branding and Marketing Model to Develop Business Leaders for a Better Tomorrow. In this session, you will learn why personal marketing or branding is important for both business educators as well as students. You will also learn about the model that I'm proposing, as well as similar models and the unique features of my model and what makes it different. You will be able to develop an authentic personal brand for yourself and also be able to teach this model to your students to help them become business leaders for a better tomorrow. Well, what is personal branding? Well, there are numerous definitions in textbooks and books and even online. I chose this one because I thought it was pretty good. Personal branding is a process by which a person differentiates themselves. And we have heard we've heard differentiation by other speakers yesterday. And we've also heard about unique value propositions or presenting value. And even though this is slightly different, it's part of the definition is to create differentiation, make yourself different from everybody else and come up with a unique value proposition of your own using SWOT analysis. And I was surprised 3 or 4 presenters have already talked about SWOT. So in this case, we're going to look at it from a personal standpoint as opposed to a business SWOT. And then you will position yourself in the marketplace in a certain way that will capture this unique value proposition that you have. And you will have a consistent message or image of yourself across all the platforms, of course, and at the same time achieve your goals. So I thought this was a pretty good definition. Well, how did I get interested in personal branding? Well, at the age of 13, I was at a yard sale and I purchased a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill for 25 cents, a paperback book. It was simply amazing. It gave 13 principles of success. And so that got me kind of interested in it. But my major interest happened when I was 18 years old and left home to go to Berea College. This was in 1976, before most of you were even born. But I wanted to brand myself. I wanted to become successful. Now, of course, at that time, we didn't call it personal branding. It was just mostly called success or personal achievement or some other term. Personal branding wasn't invented yet. But I didn't know how to go about doing this. So my dormitory was 2 doors down from the library. And often between classes or before meals, or I was on the swim team, and before swimming practice or after swimming practice or in the evenings, I would go over to the library and I started reading autobiographies and biographies of successful people, historical figures, professional athletes, entertainers, actors, and others, and business people, of course. And I think I read about 100 books during that first semester, but I kept searching for a correlation. What makes people successful? And I couldn't find anything in demographics. Some of the people who were born rich became successful. Some who were born poor actually became successful. And I couldn't, some were young when they became successful. Some were old. About half were male and the other half female. And some were handsome and some were not so handsome. So there was no demographic that had any kind of correlation. And this handsomeness will be important, and I'll speak of that in a moment. But I couldn't find any formula that would help me determine what would cause a successful person or result in somebody being successful, until Eureka, or my aha moment, came when I noticed that all successful people, every single one of the ones I studied, had 4 sciences in common. And there was a balance between the physiology, the psychology, the sociology, and what I call the philosophy. So I decided to use the pyramid shape because all the research suggested that if one side gets out of balance, then the whole pyramid could collapse. And I called this the personal marketing pyramid. And 12 years later, I wrote an article that was published, and I had a graphic artist friend. I believe I paid her $20 to draw this diagram, and I thought it turned out pretty nicely. Well, these sciences are not really new. There was, at the time, I knew about 3 in the Bible, and that was the body, mind, and soul. But I thought I was doing something special by adding sociology, until just recently, I discovered in the Bible that in 2 places, Mark 12:20 and Luke 10:27, that the verses contain all 4 of these sciences about when speaking about Jesus. Well, just a few definitions, and we've already talked about what a pyramid is and the reason I selected that. But the model, and also we talked about why it's balanced, has to be balanced. In other words, nothing should be out of proportion. If one side gets out of proportion, it really, really doesn't work. And it's holistic. And I knew from the very beginning, even as an 18-year-old, that the whole system must be analyzed rather than just its individual parts, components. Also, it's synergistic. And there are 4 sides, so the 1 + 1 + 1 equals 4 is not 4, it's something greater than 4. And it seems to work every time. And I'll explain this in more detail later, but the combined effect is greater than the sum of the individual parts. And unfortunately, it's non-compensatory, meaning that a low score, you could have a perfect 10 on all 3 sides, and then on the other side have a 4 or 5, and you're not as good as well off as somebody who just has all 6s. And I'll explain this a little bit later. And just recently too, I've added that it's dynamic, because it does have a sense of purpose and it's full of energy and so forth. Well, I found out that I wasn't the first one to discover this. Now, I maintain that I discovered this independently, but a few years ago, I bought a book. It's a little book called I Dare You by William Danforth, published in 1931, originally in 1931. Now I think it's in its 40th or 50th printing. He was the founder of Ralston Purina, and he had a very interesting life, and he tells the story in it, but he created what he called 4 square living, or the magic square. And he had physical, mental, social, religious. He also called it spiritual in his book, and many references to that. But he had a pretty good idea, very similar to what I had come up with. And the way he did his is he says, you want to make it a perfect square. And until it gets to be a perfect square, you can't really truly be successful. And he had people write right in the middle of it in their own handwriting, my checker. So every day you would look at this magic square and you'd decide whether you were making progress, continuous improvement, as one of the speakers just at 9 o'clock was talking about so nicely. And as I was thinking about that, that is so important to have continuous improvement in each of these areas, and it can show you quite dramatically which one needs work. But he had you write my checker and then sign your initials. This is William D. Danforth. So William H. Danforth, sorry. And but anyway, if I were looking at myself using this model right now, this summer, I was walking 5 miles a day. So I had almost the perfect side of the square here. And I was studying every day. I wasn't teaching, so I was doing research, even wrote a journal article. And I was writing on this. This is a book proposal, if you may kind of see that where I'm going with this. And then I also, wasn't doing a lot of socializing, and it really came to about right here. And I missed that because I was always at my neighbors and I was always out with friends. And I know a lot of you have already talked about how you've missed this. So this wasn't a full side. The religious was doing pretty good, but of course I could always have continuous improvement in this area. So my square wasn't even a square. It was all messed up. And I'll explain a little bit more later about how to fix this. But then also in 1989, Stephen Covey wrote a book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I'm sure all of you are aware of, because when I was doing my research in the summer, in June 2020, I found that he has already sold 40 million copies of this book. And in the book, he drew the model as a circle. He had the physical here, the mental, the social, and then the spiritual. And he also told you a little bit about what would fit into each of these areas. But the thing that I thought was just great is Covey added emotional. And I had struggled early on about where to put it. I tried to put it in mental and it wouldn't really work. I do think it goes in social. And I think that's a very effective place to put it. However, 15 years later, Stephen Covey wrote the book, The 8th Habit. And in this book, he redid his model. He started in 2004, he started calling these intelligences. And of course, there was a lot of research being done on multiple intelligences and emotional intelligence and all of these other areas. But he put spiritual in the middle. And I have a quote from page 53 of the book. And it says that spiritual is the central and most fundamental of all the intelligences because it becomes the source of guidance for the other 3. And I love what he's saying here, but the problem is I tried it too early on. I tried to make my pyramid work with spiritual as being the most important side. It just won't work because all researchers, every single researcher that I have studied says it has to be a balance of the 4 areas. One cannot be emphasized over another. I understand again where he was coming from, but it just simply don't work. And I think that's why it didn't take off. And 16 years later, it hasn't, you don't hear a lot about it, but you do hear a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs model, or Maslow's model, originally developed in 1943. And he is basically saying similar things that Danforth and Covey said. In other words, you have physiological needs. He added warmth, and I guess that's true, or shelter or whatever. Then he says safety needs, and going up to the social needs of belonging and relationships, and then so forth. Well, he never, I found out recently, there was an article in the Academy of Management Journal just recently, just the last couple of issues, maybe the last issue, that said that they searched all of his papers, and they found that he never intended for it to be a hierarchy. He never intended for it to be a pyramid even. And he didn't say anything because it just took off. It was like going viral today on the internet. Textbook authors did the pyramid design, and they made it like a hierarchy. I remember vividly in either 1978 as a sophomore or 1979 as a junior at Berea College, in the first class, I guess it was a management class, it might have been a marketing class, because we all use this model in our classes, and you probably do too. And I asked my professor, because I was already using my pyramid theory, I joined the swim team, even though I was terrible my freshman year, because I knew I wouldn't exercise if I wasn't pretty much forced to do it. So I found that uh, by joining the swim team, I also knew I was working on these other areas. I was working on the friendship, because almost all of my friends were other swim team members, and we would often eat together. We would go to church together, and all these other areas were being taken care of simultaneously. I know we used to have to swim a mile for warm up and a mile for warm down during practice, and I never did understand that. But during that mile of swimming, I would often pray, or I would often study for a test in my mind as I was swimming from back and forth and so forth. Well, I asked my professor, I said to him, I said, so it means that you have to satisfy the food, water, and rest and exercise and all this, when the physiological needs first, before you can go to these. And he hawed around, and finally he said, well, you got to do it at a minimum level before you can go to the next level, and so forth. And then I also said, well, I don't understand. I said, I understand these, but I think you can do them at the same time. And he didn't really agree, but he said, but then I said, well, what really is self-actualization? I said, I love that concept, but I don't really know what it is, even though it says it's achieving your full potential. And I think at the time, the Army slogan was, be all you can be. And I think he used that to try to help me understand what it was. But I still think that and they noted this, there were problems with this theory, not only about it being a hierarchy, but there's all kinds of problems that the Academy of Management article goes into. And I think it's really, really well done. But it's been very useful for me to determine how my model is going to work. And I think the contribution that I'll be making with this theory is that the 4 areas, they can have interaction effects, multiple interaction effects. And I've color-coded them, color-coded physiology as red or pink, and psychology is yellow, sociology is green, and philosophy is blue, to show you these interactions. There are 6 interactions between 2, and the sociology and philosophy is this dark blue here, it's this here, it's this here, and this here, between these two, between these two, between these two. And then you have to go across between sociology and physiology, and then psychology and philosophy. And then the other important thing is there are 4 combinations of a 3. So you have philosophy, sociology, and psychology is right there, and psychology, physiology, and philosophy right here, and these 3 right here, and these 3 right here. And finally, the 11th interaction effect is right here in the middle, where you have all 4 working at the same time. And I was even doing this as a college student without realizing it. Of course, I hadn't modeled it particularly, or I was just thinking about it. Well, if you want to look at, it might be easier to look at the pyramid from the top view, looking down. So if you're looking down on it, you can see the physiology is here, and you can see there's a relation. I have the 2 arrows going back and forth between these 2. For example, while I was swimming, well, let's say that I'm out walking, and I'm also with a friend, and we're studying for a test or whatever. You can see how the combinations would work. And what I couldn't draw here, because I tried, and this is from the manuscript that I'm writing right now for a journal it's not published yet. Of course, I don't have it ready. It's a work in paper, but you have to do the 3. So, I'm sorry. I would draw around here to get these 3, and then of course you have a circle that would get all 4 into that. Well, the question becomes, what are the steps to creating a personal brand? And the first thing you do is Google yourself, because you have to know what is out there on social media about you right now. And when I Google myself, I do it a couple times a year, but I've learned that I need to use 3 different ways, or 4 even, of my name. I start with Donald W. Caudill, and I get a lot of hits on that. Now, by the way, I want to tell you right up front, I am not the Donald W. Caudill in Eastern Kentucky who's been arrested for beating his wife. That is not me. That's the only one that shows up. Most of them are me on the first and second page now. And then I also use Donald Caudill or Don Caudill. And then sometimes I'll add Dr. Don Caudill or Dr. Donald W., whatever, until I get all of the things that are out there about myself. You'd be surprised how just those slight variations pick up links that you had that you'd forgotten about, that you didn't realize was already there online. Then the second step is to create what's called an MPS, what gives you meaning, pleasure, strengths. And I'll talk about this a little bit later specifically, because this leads to your own personal mission statement and your own mantra. And 3, you conduct a SWOT analysis on yourself. You use each characteristic of the 4 sciences, and so many presenters have talked about SWOT already, as well as mission statements, as well as strengths. And then 4th is you set specific and measurable goals. In other words, you give specific due dates about when you're going to achieve each of these items, each goal in each of the 4 sciences. And finally, you position yourself based on your unique value proposition. You want to give value, and all of us have a way to give value. We also have a purpose in our life. All of us have something that only we can do. And once you find that, you're very close to having a successful personal brand, as well as having a happy life. And then finally, you have to write your story. Now, you have to teach your students how to write their story. In other words, it has to be written down. And you have to start from the beginning, and then you write your future. And once you start writing it down, you're actually more likely to achieve it. Well, this is not my original, but I love it. It was in a book in 2007, and it's step number 2 after you find out what's already out there about you, is you find out what gives you meaning, or you determine what gives you meaning, what provides you with a purpose, and then what gives you pleasure, what do you enjoy doing? And then what are your strengths? And my colleagues yesterday, in other words, what are you good at? My colleagues yesterday, Dr. Mankins and Dean Taylor, talked about strength finders. And I highly, highly recommend strength finders, because sometimes you don't know what your strengths are. They did a fine job talking about how that would work. Well, all 3 of these things have to come together. Find out which of these 3 things are in common. And that's where you begin in your process to becoming a successful brand. Well, then you also need to write your own personal mission statement. I do believe that as far as I know, I'm the only professor in the world who puts his personal mission statement directly on every syllabus, and on Blackboard, and shares it with his students every single semester, and sometimes many times. And of course, I revise this once a year, usually during the summer, when I'm off and have plenty of time to work on it. This past March, when COVID hit, it changed everything for almost all of us. And what I did with my personal mission, of course, remember, it has to be congruent with the university mission statement, as well as our Godbold School of Business mission statement. So it's rather lengthy, but it has to be. So the first things that I did is I took all of this research, I gathered all the research, and I came up with the 10 most important, 10 or so, actually, there are 13 here, but it's an evolving, it's continuous improvement is what you do. And the speaker at 9 o'clock just talked about that so eloquently. But anyway, I was working on this in the spring, and it used to be that respectful was number 1, respecting your students. But there was several articles, and it was online, and I didn't keep a copy. And that's what I sometimes can kick myself for not doing. But they had done some initial research, and they said the most important thing that students wanted during the COVID crisis, and still now, is for you to be flexible. And I thought, well, I can do that. So when I started becoming more flexible, things started improving dramatically. And this was right after spring break, right when it began. And I discovered it quite by accident. So I added flexible in July to my new personal mission statement. But responsive is like the third or fourth, being approachable, being responsive. I do have students tell me that I'm the most responsive of every single professor that they ever had. And of course, I'm only able to do this because I work 60 to 80 hours a week. But of course, I believe that all work has dignity. And I love working. And so that's why I'm almost always online, at least 12 to 16 hours a day. And this is the most important thing. It's important to be knowledgeable about your subject area, but students want to know that you care before they care how knowledgeable you are. And I found also they like a well-organized class, and that is very important, but they are ready to exchange being well-organized for flexibility. If you can be more flexible, they're willing to give up, they're willing to forgive you for not being as organized as they want. I also found interesting that they wanted a bit of rigor. They didn't want you to be the easiest professor. They wanted, yeah, they like getting an A, and if all people gets A, they don't particularly care that they got one, as long as they got one too. But I found that they wanted you to be a little to be challenging, to give them a class, a course that is challenging. And of course, I firmly believe in the liberal arts. I am a product of that, and I believe the liberally educated business student is going to have so many more opportunities in the business world. And of course, I want my students to live up to their God-given potential, pursue lifelong learning. Here we go about continuous learning again, continuous improvement, and perform joyful, compassionate service for God and humanity. Now, this is too long. So what I try to do on a daily basis is live my personal mantra and just write this mantra. And this one came about in 2011. I was kind of late getting to it, but I had an emergency. My appendix almost burst. I nearly died. And I decided, well, what do I really want to do going forward? And of course, I always loved working. So work hard, live modestly. I thought, well, I don't need all this stuff. I'm going to start giving it away. Give generously. Now, I had these three at first. And then I added, a few years after, I added laugh often, because laughing often is psychological, of course, but it's also has a physical impact. And we'll see in a moment about the interaction effects of these. But encourage your students to write a personal mantra. Write a personal mantra for yourself, and then you can live that, and that will guide your teaching, that will guide your life. Well, I came up with this simple formula, and it is really simple, and I almost thought it was too simple. Is a successful personal brand is equal to the sum of physiology, psychology, sociology, and philosophy on a 10-point scale. Then, because of the balance and the harmony that has to be there, I decided it had to be multiplied. These up to 4 to 40 points had to be multiplied times the synergy score. So I'll explain that in a second. Well, first, I want to just give you, because time is a little short now, I'm going to just give you a few items that we know for a fact are included in each of the 4 sides of this model. We don't know them all. I'm working on that right now. I will have to do factor analysis, have to take like 30 or 40 different factors that could be physiology, and then, which is the science that deals with the functions of the body, and then come around to see if, and do the factor analysis, and finally do the regression analysis to see what the true formula is. But I think this is going to be pretty close. This is what I'm hypothesizing right now. But we do know that physical attractiveness is half of your physiology score. We know from research that physically attractive people, handsome, good-looking people, are more likely to become successful brands. It's just a known fact. Well, people like to be around attractive people, so they have an easier time. Others help them. So this is half of the score. But I'm going to share some things that will show you simple things you can do to make yourself more physically attractive to others. Now, if we were doing this in real life, we would be showing a picture of you, and now probably a video of you, to about 100 people. and they would then give you a ranking. But in a few minutes, I want you to rank your own self. So be thinking about that on a 1 to 5 scale. And of course, we all know about how important nutrition is and what to do about it. We just sometimes don't do it. I have gained 20 pounds in the last 6 weeks. And of course, it's just because I just can't stop eating and I don't do a lot of this stuff. And exercise, as I said, I was walking 5 miles a day this summer and right before classes began, and now I'm hardly walking a half a mile a day and not doing very much to build strength or flexibility either. Well, sleep is so important. And unfortunately, I haven't been getting the last 6 weeks. I go to bed, when I go to bed, let's say I go to bed at midnight, I can go to sleep right away, but at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, or 4 o'clock, I'm up and I just cannot get back to sleep. So, but some successful people just slept very little. For example, historians will tell us that Ben Franklin never slept. He just took naps. Well, I'm reading his autobiography right now. I have that book. I probably bought it at a yard sale. And this doesn't seem to be true, but the research said that, but I think it's going to be proven wrong. Napoleon, now we know this for sure, he slept about 4 hours a night. But after a campaign, he was known to sleep like 18 hours straight through. Thomas Edison said sleep was a waste of time, and he did only 3 to 4 hours a night. He said he'd rather be in his lab working on things. And of course, we can't argue that Einstein wasn't a successful brand, but he slept 10 hours a night. Plus, he took numerous naps during the day. And of course, we all know that President Trump has said that he only sleeps 3 hours per night. And these other things are very important too. Posture. Danforth, in his book, I Dare You, which again was written toward young people, specifically those from poorer backgrounds, he devotes 3 pages to posture alone. And of course, we know grooming can improve your physical attractiveness if you're clean and the hair is clean and cut neatly and you're trim. And all of these things can help improve that score. Clothing, the thing you need to know is tell your students, dress for the job they want, not the job they currently have. And then a smile a lot, we know, will make you more attractive. And of course, stress management. And I believe one of the speakers spoke about this earlier, but it is so important. And it's also a psychological effect. But laughter, I want to spend a little time on laughter. Children laugh numerous times a day. Now I have another little asterisk here because we do know for a fact, all the studies have shown that the average adult laughs 17 times a day. The average child, several hundred. We don't know exactly the number. 300 to 400 might be wrong. It could be, but it's still 3 to 5, 6, 10 times even more than what the adult laughs. So we should learn from children. But humans are the only creatures endowed with the power of laughter. I remember one time, a long time ago, I asked a student about a student said to me, why do they, a student said, well, what about the hyena? And I said, oh, the hyena, they said, it makes the laughter sound. And I said, well, I don't know. I'll check back with you. The next class, I'll research it and check back. And I did the research and I came back and I reported that it's true that the hyena makes a sound that sounds like laughter, but they really didn't see anything funny. We're still the only people that are endowed with the power of laughter. We do know that comedians live the longest of any profession. And so that should say something there too. And again, there's the interaction effect between these two sides. Now, psychology is the science which deals with the mind, its activities and behavior. And the most important thing here is about reading. And I used to read every night. I'd read 2 or 3 books a week. And I've gotten out of that here lately, but I hope to get back into it. Reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body. And we know, and you could tell your students, that to become an expert in an area, it takes 10,000 hours of study, of practice. And as soon as they get that amount of study, they can be an expert in a particular area. We do know, and one speaker mentioned this, that the road to a better life is education. It can be formal or it can be informal, like this conference right now, like these sessions that we're participating in, or even self-study. And interesting enough, it could be games, and it could be like playing cards and dominoes and doing crossword puzzles. But the most interesting thing about psychology I found was how you manage your time. And on average, we get 26,000 days of a life. And if you look at it as terms of days, it becomes very, very important to see that, for example, I have lived 22,714 days as of today. Actually, not until 8:20 tonight p.m., 8:20 p.m. Eastern time. I was born at 8:20 p.m. Eastern time. So it won't be quite 22,714 days until tonight. But basically, I have fewer than 3,300 days to go if I live the average life. So you can see that's less than 10 years. So it makes you think about what you're going to do with the rest of your life. And of course, sociology is a friendship, fellowship, and companionship. I'm going to go over this quickly because I see the time is running short, and you have family relationships, of course, relationships with friends and fans and followers, especially on social media. And one speaker talked about mentors and the importance of having mentors. Another speaker talked about networking and collaborating and teamwork. We heard that a lot yesterday and today. And then we also heard about about travel. And after COVID, I used to go at least once a year somewhere internationally and studying the marketing in different countries and their values. And a lot of speakers have alluded to this already at this conference, but after COVID-19, I want to get back into doing that. And philosophy, the last side, is the science which deals with beliefs about God and existence and why you're here. And I'll let you read most of this, but the most important thing is about having your own personal code of ethics and having your own mission and vision and knowing your purpose and why you exist. And we've already talked about a lot of this, but other things that are going to fit on this side of the model are performing service. And there was even a session on service learning and being grateful for things, giving back, and having a legacy. Well, I want you to score yourself right now and take out a piece of paper and a pencil and just write down a score of 1 to 5 about how physically attractive you are right now. And then the other 5 points will be on your self-care score. And I know one speaker who was speaking about was the word roadmap, 1 word or 2. I experienced the same problem with self-care, and some dictionaries had it as 2 words, some had it as 1 word, some even had a hyphen. So I made it both places so that you would, so depending on how you thought it should be. And it included, of course, you remember what we talked about. So give yourself a score there, but also write down, if you can think of them right now, at least 2 specific goals about how you're going to improve in this area. And I'm going to start walking 5 miles a day again, or try to get up to that. First day, I only walked like a mile. The second day, maybe 1.5 miles and 2. That's what. And I propose to lose 10 pounds by, remember, set a date, by December the 31st of this year. And that's about 9 weeks from now. So I can lose 1 pound a week if I set my mind to it, especially when I start walking again every day. So have specific goals, give yourself a score. Psychology, the same thing. I'm going to set a new goal of reading every night again. And also, I hope to get a book contract by May the 31st. Okay, so we're getting really close to time. I'll hurry this up. And the book contract would be for this book, for what this research I'm presenting right now. And then give yourself a score of 1 to 10 on sociology. And my specific goal here is to win the Gardner-Webb Teaching Award. This is a lofty goal this year because it's kind of difficult to do, as you can imagine. But your goals should be challenging. They should be not unreachable, but close to it in some cases. And philosophy, I want to start back a gratitude journal by next week. And I really do plan to do this because I remember it was so successful. It even helped me sleep. Right before I would go to bed, I'd write down the things that I was grateful for that day. And then I want you to look and see how balanced your sides are. Now, here are just some examples about how to score these. And I'll just be brief here. If you have 4 5s, you're going to get 200 points because they're in balance. And if you have a 4 and a 6 and then 2 5s, it's still in balance. It's not that far off from each other. So you still get 200 points. But the problem becomes is when you start getting at least 2 points away from the other 3, and then you have to start reducing by 2 points your score, your synergy score. And see, you drop how you drop when you start multiplying by the synergy score. You can have a 10 even, and then 3 5s, and you end up with only 100 points because you have to drop 6 points, and even 10 and a 9. So it is better when you have a 10 and 3 5s, you should cut back on this. You know, you've seen the person who's really had some really in great shape. Well, they can let up a little bit on that to improve these others if they're truly 5s. So now, do you have your score? Here's what it means. If it's 360 to 400, you already have a very good to excellent brand. It's just like an A, B, C, D, and 200 to 279 is not bad. It's average or below average personal brand, but it should show you where you need to make improvements. Now, below 200, what it means is that we need to do therapy probably right after this session because you're not very happy. You've got some problems, but we'll help you out. So thank you very much. And I want to leave you with a quote by George Box. He said, "All models are wrong, but some are useful. It is my sincere hope that my personal branding model is useful for developing business leaders for a better tomorrow." Thanks again. Thank you, Sarah.
Wow, is all I can say. Don, I am just speechless about the quality of that presentation, how enlightening it was. I know that our attendees enjoyed it thoroughly. I wanted to let you know that there were so many things that were tangible and helpful and just completely stood out, specifically in the current climate of our 2020. I wanted to make sure that you addressed one of our questions from Dr. Jamie Conrad. And it was a fantastic question because this is something that I've had to deal with personally with my faculty members, with my students. And Dr. Conrad, thank you for asking this. So Don, to you, how do you define flexibility with your students? Just how flexible do you feel we should be, especially right now, while still helping them understand the importance of accountability?
Okay, please ask that again. I'm trying to put the picture on, but it doesn't seem to be.
Absolutely, I'll be happy to ask it again. So Don, first I'll start out by saying, how do you define flexibility with your students?
Oh, okay, flexibility. Well, this is very interesting because I was already teaching online when COVID happened, and there were some actually scary moments, and it was also our spring break. So I took the whole spring break to work on, I was actually going to a conference, but I got afraid to go. And I took the whole spring break to work on the courses. And I found the most interesting thing is they just needed a little bit of extra time. Now my syllabus kind of prevented that unless I did it for the entire class. And so I immediately started doing that. But I discovered something that was incredibly important, and that was, you have to make them earn the extra time. If you give them the extra time, it didn't work nearly as well. And I did that. I extended it by 2 days because the assignment by 2 days because our university extended spring break by 2 days. But that didn't make them happy. But I gave them little exercises, current events, and about how COVID is going to affect this in marketing and that in marketing. And it worked out very successfully at that point.
That's a wonderful example, and I appreciate you expressing such a tangible way in which you were able to issue flexibility and how it was an earned type of relationship. So kudos to you for that. Do you feel that that helped connect them to understanding more of an in-depth level of accountability in the virtual setting and the classroom environment? Can you speak a little bit to that, Don, as well?
I think it did tremendously. I'll give you an example. I have I have all the assignments on adaptive release because I don't like them necessarily working ahead, but it's okay to work ahead because the next assignment comes on as soon as they submit the current one. The problem with that was some of them needed extra time on the current assignment due to family situations. So I then opened all the assignments, the remaining assignments, and I created one assignment about COVID directly, specifically, and replaced it with an existing assignment in that respect. But to make them accountable for their work, they could work ahead, and they had no excuse by saying, well, I needed 3 extra days this week, I need 3 extra days next week. Well, they could work on them simultaneously.
Don, could I please take one of your classes, if not all of them?
I would love for you to do so. Yes, thank you.
Trust me when I say that all of our attendees, they've had great feedback from Julie East. She loved the presentation. She is excited to implement this model.
Thank you, Julie.
Some things that just really stood out to me in this presentation. I love the fact that you started your personal branding journey in 1976 when that was really not a concept that many people were familiar with in the 70s. So that was so cool that even back in 76, you were thinking, you know what? I need to make a name for myself and who I am, what I represent, and how that also contributed later on to the creation of your PMS, your personal mantra statement. So can you speak a little bit to that, Don?
Yes, it's very interesting. And I do share this with my students that I was born pretty much in poverty, but in the Appalachian Mountains. But people still comment that my mother's house was so clean, the floors were so clean that they could literally eat off of them. And of course I had hand-me-downs and things. So there was a kind of a burning desire to become successful, but I just didn't really know how. And I didn't know it was called branding. I always knew that I loved marketing. Even as a 13-year-old, I couldn't get a work permit and go to work, but I did. I started a lawn care service. I started a mail order business, which is now kind of like the internet business. And it actually was profitable after a year. I saved a lot of money. And I started realizing that I can make money if I just use my marketing knowledge, the knowledge that I have. So I've loved marketing ever since. But then at 15 years and 8 months old, I went to the principal's office and got a work permit and went downtown Norton, Virginia, which is only 5,000 people, even fewer now. And the first place I went was F.W. Woolworth, the fourth largest retailer in 1973, as a 15-year-old, almost 16-year-old. And the manager was so impressed with me about my willingness to work to do anything, even cleaning the store, which you can learn from anybody and everybody I've found. So he taught me more about marketing, literally, in those 3 years after school and on weekends than I ever learned in any marketing course that I've ever had, including doctoral courses in marketing. So it means that I want to give my students a practical course in whatever they take, that's something they could use, a takeaway from every course. And I also want them to laugh, because at least 3 times during a lecture or a video lecture, in this case right now, during COVID.
That is so refreshing to hear, because we all need laughter. And we have a couple minutes before the session closes, but I wanted just to give everyone a friendly reminder to make sure that you complete the Best Regions survey. It is in the chat, so please do that and make sure that your voice is heard. It's so important to us and to ACBSP and to our presenters. Don, laughter, you mentioned the MPS concept as well, meaning, pleasure, and strength, almost like a personal SWOT analysis. And that is a fascinating concept, because as we've navigated this year of having to pivot on the hour to hour, so to speak, focusing on oneself can be quite a challenge. So I know we only have about a minute left, but the MPS concept was quite fascinating in your presentation as well.
I wish I had invented that. I guess we all think about it from time to time, but it really works when you see where do all three fit together? And then you find, oh, this is my strength. This is what I need to do. This is my purpose, rather. And when you find that purpose, you're going to become happy, because there's no other way, because you'll see it. What are you good at? What gives you meaning, pleasure, and so forth.
Amen to that, my friend. You could not have said that better. And Don, we appreciate you so much, and we thank you for your time today. You started out our morning in such a positive manner. Everyone, have a fantastic day and enjoy the rest of your sessions. Take good care.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.